Hey, I'm Amar.
And I'm Matthew.
And this is Our Side of the Coin.
Hey yo, what is up guys? It's your boys Amar and Matthew, and today we'll be talking about a brand new topic. We'll be talking about the least important class in school. Let's get right into it.
Alright, thanks Alharid. Let's start right off with you. What do you got?
Okay, so the first clarification we have to make is we're talking about core subjects. What are the
core subjects only.
What are they?
So math, English, foreign language, science, history, and an art. But whether that be music, art, or choir.
So the most obvious thing that comes to mind is that the art is the least useful because you can just do that by yourself.
Is it though? Because the reason you take classes is basically to learn how to do something better. So I mean, if you're actually trying to pursue a career in art, right? Wouldn't an art class help you a lot more? Like, why would you use? So I think my stance is I think I'm gonna go with literature here.
All right.
Because especially in Y-High, because literature is fids. Take the most random sentence. You could literally, and you know it, you could take literally any sentence out of any book, twist it however you want, and get your point through. Like, there's no point to that. Nobody benefits. All you're doing is spending 4 years on making bullcrap.
So what I'm gonna say is this is a pretty subjective argument because it's like which is more important,
right?
Art
and also
or
depends on our
literature,
career choices, obviously.
Well, also that, yeah. But the thing I'll say about literature, right, is you're talking about how you twist words to mean whatever you want. That is a huge part of arguably how to be successful in the world.
So you're promoting lying.
I'm not promoting lying, but I'm promoting being able to interpret words and how to be able to use words effectively because words are how we're in an audio
but
communication.
Let's be real. Do you think that the author actually intended the curtains were blue? Do you really think now, as Y-High students, what do we see? The curtains are blue. That represents sadness and the despair that the character felt. It's blue curtains.
It doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, it doesn't really matter what the audience meant because those skills you can use outside of a book. You could use in anything anybody says. Like if you're making a speech. Those skills in literature you can use to get a point across.
I feel like there's different skill sets in a speech. In a speech, I understand what you're saying when manipulating words, but you're not manipulating interpretation. Mm. So, it's your speech. You're making it how you want. You're not restricted to whatever words are in front of you.
It also doesn't have to be a speech. It could just be how we interpret the world, how we interpret issues in society, how we interpret what's the most important thing.
Trump's wall is symbolic of something?
No, but it could be a racial tension, skills in literature you could use to analyze different points of view, all this kind of points of view, bias, all that kind of stuff is skills you learn in literature.
I would say that other classes might teach it. History teaches it a lot better. History tells you to look at multiple perspectives and analyze it according to actually what happened, not because the curtains are blue. But literature is focused namely on fiction, right? So first of all, it's not 100% applicable,
So fiction, right, and literature, it's the more subjective side of humanity, and also the subjective and the unconscious. I might be sounding a little
mystical,
I guess, or what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, but because it's arguably literature is sort of an art form, right, and art and music and literature.
Okay, but Go ahead, keep going.
Those are the things we use to sort of describe our emotions that we can't do another way. History is good for a more objective analysis on the way that we perceive the world, but literature is a more into the unconscious subjective
Okay,
side.
so we take arts and stuff, right, and literature to measure our progress as humanity, especially when we have technological booms. When we have technological booms, you see that there's a lot more cultural, you see a lot of art movements, you see a lot of literature movements, right? But what's the purpose of any of those? So now I'm going to clump art and literature together, right? I'm going to say, right after literature comes art, because at least art you're able to apply, and I feel like art is something that needs to be interpreted, whereas literature is almost 70% straightforward. You read the book and it almost takes you step by step. The one missing piece might be what it's supposed to show. You know that book Animal Farm, right?
Yeah.
That's supposed to represent
Really boring.
Well, it's supposed to represent Russia.
Yeah,
and once you get that piece, everything clicks together. You don't need to know that the animals are symbolic of this and this and this and this. You could piece that together without literature.
But everything is not 100% objective. Like, even though it goes step by step, people are going to interpret that and, like, view it and internalize it.
But why is that important?
It's important to recognize those because we're all humans, and to succeed, we need to communicate and work with and just be with other humans.
But why does it matter if we're communicating about something that's, like, subjective like that?
Because we are subjective.
We are subjective.
Yeah,
I agree.
So it's important to be able to, like, understand and manipulate that.
But that's what I feel like the more objective things teach us. We develop from the sciences, we develop from history, we develop from math to learn more perspective. But I don't feel that literature is able to provide us with different viewpoints.
I feel like you just, like, proved my point. We have so many objective classes. If we need at least one,
I feel like we don't need it. I feel like those are skills that are picked up. What I'm saying, I think you misinterpreted what I'm saying. I'm saying you have history, so now you're seeing different events from different perspectives, right? Obviously, you're not just going to look at the U.S. during World War II. You're going to look at Japan. You're going to look at Germany, right? You have
Italy,
math, logic and reasoning. You have sciences,
country.
Right? All these stuff that back it up. These subjective, we have them, but, like, they're turned into, especially our literature class. Like, art I can see a lot more, right? Because art is a more free-flowing, emotional thing, where you actually almost see the raw emotion behind whoever's authoring. Literature, you get the book, right?
Yeah.
And you have your text, but, like, you can almost see, it's almost like...
I feel like a literature is like a sort of like best of both worlds kind of scenario, because you have your objective classes like history and math where you see the way things are, and then history is like different views, and then you have art, which is just the complete opposite. It could be like there's almost like no form to it, like no objective basis. I mean, sometimes there is, but generally, right? Yeah. And then literature is the combination of those two worlds, and that combination of those two worlds is the world we live in.
Okay, but what makes that more important than any other subject? I'm saying that's the least useful subject. That's our topic today. It's the least useful subject.
I feel like because we were talking about, I said art is the least useful, and you said literature is the least useful. I feel like literature is more useful than art because art is too far in the other direction into subjectivity.
I feel like,
but literature is the most applicable.
I feel like you want to I'm going to go off your point where where you're saying we as humans we should learn how to analyze different subjective viewpoints, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you want to immerse yourself in that subjective viewpoint? Isn't that why people create art, so they can like put themselves fully into it, like not just analyzing the artwork, just feeling the artwork, right?
I think I
feeling the emotions.
I think I get what you're saying, but
and literature doesn't provide that. Literature is, like you said, a half and half, right? Where it'll provide you the objective and subjective, but it's not a total. Especially classic literature, right? I can see like certain books can be written in a way that pull you in and take an emotional coaster, but classical books, they're like almost entirely symbolical, and you rarely get dragged into the emotional roller coaster.
But like, I feel like the literature is a lot more useful in our like day-to-day lives because like art and music exists, but it's really hard to like apply those sort of skills that you could get from that into like other areas that aren't art.
Do you think humanity would be stuck without art and literature?
Art and literature would come up without school.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but like, do you think we need it as humanity?
No, that's what I'm arguing. That we don't need the art and literature.
Then why do that's what I'm saying?
No, we don't need the art, but yeah, we don't need the art, and like arguably we don't need the literature. But we're arguing the least useful subject. I argue
literature versus art right now.
Yeah,
and we're both putting these at the bottom, right?
Yeah, I mean, but that's just because of my personal taste. I hate literature.
Okay, what about music?
And I love music. But
you love music. Right?
I feel like I could be pursuing you could pursue music outside of school.
Yeah, but it's not like
it's a lot harder to pursue literature out. So
I would disagree because I read a lot of books from a wide variety of stuff. I read like realistic fiction, nonfiction, fantasy, magical realism. Right? I read like all of that for fun, right?
I mean,
and I see. And I've listened to music, and I've obviously seen art, right? So what I get from that is that like the way literature is portrayed. I don't know what I'm trying to get at here. I have a point in my head. I don't know how to form it.
See, if you had taken more literature classes, it'd be more easy to.
Oh, that's exactly what my point. Okay, look. So I read a lot of books, right? And I don't naturally once you get introduced to reading from a kindergarten, right? There's a hunger within a lot of people. I felt that hunger where you just want to keep reading and reading and reading and reading. You don't need to teach people how to analyze it. It should be intuitional. You should know how to analyze it. Like, why are we teaching people to take sentences out of the book and say, this means this? What kind of crap is it? Like, that's actual nonsense. That's the thing.
You think so? I mean, like not the nonsense part, but do you think there are skills that you could learn from like from a different viewpoint than your own to like analyze something differently or see it in a different light? Like I guess that's one. Like, because you could teach math by yourself. You could just like do a bunch of problems. You could do history by yourself. You could just look it up online. You could do this for all of them. You could just look up everything.
Okay, we don't need school then.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But the thing about literature is, it's all about what I was talking about, the subjectivity and the different viewpoints. And you can get that in school.
Why is it? You can also get that online. Same point that you're making with history and math. You can look online. What did this critic say about this? What did this critic say about this?
You could. Wait. Hold
on. Yeah, exactly. You could, right? But
I mean, you could do that with music also. You could do that with everything. So are we just done? None of the classes are useful?
No, okay, look. Here's the thing with history, right? The thing with history is that you can't really... You can try, right? But you'll never get a full grasp of it if you're just looking online. That's the reality of it, right? Most researchers have to go to... Yes, most researchers look online. They look they look for primary sources. Yeah. Professional historians don't just go online. Okay, when was World War II?
You can find those primary sources online. Like archives, like London Archive, or
you can find something
from Library of Congress archive. If a historian is going to find a resource, right, and a primary source, like the first ever discovered, right, they're going to write a paper of it, and then they're going to publish it, and then while they're doing that, the primary source is going to become public.
Yeah.
So then you could just look it up online also.
I don't think I have my point across. What I'm saying is that the reason we take history, the reason we take math, the reason we take science is there's stuff that can't necessarily mostly, like, I've taken a couple online courses. Okay, let me tell you this little fiasco I had in middle school, right? So I was a couple grades ahead in math. I believe I've told you this before. And I had a couple free, like, trimesters. So they gave me a couple online classes, right? Gave me all the resources, gave me all the textbook. And it was a pass-fail class, thankfully. But I scored horribly in those classes. That's what I'm saying. With a literature class, right? You read the book, right? And I guess freshman literature might have been, like, the only thing where you were taught the A, B, C, D, E. Why are we doing literature for 4 years? We should be analyzing how to comprehend books. We should be trying to up our reading level. That's, I think, the biggest thing that we don't do in
Wait, what's that?
So, like, what level, what
vocabulary?
Vocabulary is a big one, right? Because what are you going to use in the real world? Are you going to use more of, okay, this represents this? Or are you going to use vocabulary while giving speeches, vocabulary while applying for jobs, right?
Well, you do both.
No, why would you use the other one?
Well, for the speech...
If I'm applying as a doctor, if I'm applying as an engineer, why would I need to know that this represents this?
No, it wouldn't be, like, specific. I sort of, like, misjumbled my point. It's not, like, just about communicating. It's sort of like a literature, like, bridging in a sort of theology, like, philosophy. Like, no, theory of knowledge.
Why don't we just replace literature with, like, a better theory of knowledge class?
I mean, we could. But that's not what we're arguing. It's not a core class, so we aren't. Oh, wait, okay. But, I mean, yeah, we could. I mean, I would be in favor of that, like, having an actually, like, a good theory of knowledge class.
Or philosophy class.
And then replacing it instead of... Or maybe having literature as a part of that. But that's not what we're arguing, because it's not a core class.
Okay, but I feel like literature can be replaced then.
Yeah.
So, it's a class that can easily be replaced.
Yeah, right.
So do you get what I'm getting at? It's then that makes it the most least useful subject.
But...
If it can easily be replaced by another class, then why haven't we replaced it yet? That makes it super useless. Why are we studying FIDS?
Because in our core classes, we don't, like, we're talking about, like, removing literature, not just replacing it with, like, literature class.
Obviously,
that's what you're talking about.
No. We can't just remove a class. You're going to have to replace it with something. Obviously, there's going to be a gap in there. But I'm saying it's the least useful one and the easiest to replace.
It's pretty, I'd say, like, we could replace it, but I'm not saying it's least useful because as of right now, literature is that. Is what I was talking about.
With the subjectiveness, the stuff that we have to look at.
And the theory of knowledge. Because in our world, theory of knowledge doesn't exist. It's just the core classes.
Yeah,
That's the assumption we made at the beginning. So, literature, it might be the most replaceable, but because you're saying that, like, the theory of knowledge is we need to have that also, literature is the closest thing we have to that. And that's why it's so
I feel like we'll go back to the thing where you were talking about art and literature, right?
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying where there's a bridge between literature and the objectiveness and the subjectiveness.
Yeah.
Right? But I feel like art is more of a skill that can be used in a wider variety of fields than literature. Even as an engineer, right? Obviously you're going to have to draw stuff. Or you're like, okay, well, like, give me an example of an engineer.
Software engineer.
Okay.
Start that.
Let's take a software engineer, right? he's gonna have to design and architect either whatever he's gonna make, right? Databases, servers. He's gonna have to compile. It isn't art at a point. It is similar to so I don't
It's
know.
more graphic design.
Okay, graphic design, but like even my dad does server engineering, right? He does more team management or whatever now, but like he worked with servers, right? You have to construct a way to make these servers like work together without like overflowing your storage limit, how to condense this stuff, right? And I feel like art, the skills you learn in art, the organization, the neatness, right? The not even just drawing, just the general like being neat, knowing how stuff fits together, knowing how it appeals, the optimization of art. I feel like that's a lot more useful to a lot more subjects than you would use than in literature.
I will concede that like the art music is more practical than literature, but I wouldn't say it's more useful because it's less about a specific instance where this piece of useful is helpful. It's more of just like just going about your life. Like how would you get to like a software engineer point at all? Or what about if you're doing a software engineer, how about your audience? What are the needs of your audience? That sort of thing. Like it's less applicable in like specific instances, and it's more of like just a way of thinking, a development of your brain. Yeah.
Well, why isn't art that? Art is definitely that too, because when we're looking at art, it's more subjective. Yes, it's definitely more subjective.
And because it's more subjective, it's less applicable.
I disagree. There is a lot of art that is also connected to art. I feel like there is probably, you can equate it to literature, whereas literature you have your magical fantasies, right, which have absolutely nothing to do with the real world.
Same thing for art.
Right, same thing with art. You have your abstract, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in art you have your art based on real events, art with symbolizing real events. So you can connect it that way. But then at that point, then we equated them, right? And now art has more practical uses on top of it.
Art is more subjective and fantasy because it's literally made up. But like,
it's not made up though. Not all of it. Literature is also made up. You could say it's made up. Art is also based off events. Artists don't just random. Okay, some artists do, but it depends on your genre.
And some literature,
generally, even surrealism, right? Do you know what surrealism is? Surrealism is like based off of and so they take something real and then they just distort it horribly. So like a human with like 3 legs and a wing, for example, right? Like it's based off something. There's a reason artists did it, right? Same thing in literature. If it's like if it's based off a real world event, there's a reason that the artist did it, right?
So what the point you're trying to make is that they're equal in some way.
They're equal in some way, and then on top of that, art has more practical skills. That's what I'm saying. That's why literature is less useful than art.
But like, it has more practical skills, but then the subjective side, I would say, is harder to see
grasp
from an artist perspective. Because like from a literature perspective, you were saying it's more straightforward.
Yeah.
And then it's more useful because it's more straightforward
in general. So what I'm saying is right. Okay, so you can So art, right? I get what you're saying. Art, literature is more straightforward or something. But when we're equating, right, you're saying that we take literature in order to further our knowledge of being able to comprehend others' opinions, others' representations, right? Wouldn't you want to take? You could say like art is a higher form of that, and it might require more talent, right? Obviously, to interpret it, but art will take you further in being able to analyze what other people are thinking, rather than
I would disagree with that because people don't think like in terms of art. Like people don't like our minds are like it's too far in the unconscious. Like it's important to understand, but it's less applicable than the literature because it's more like forward in our thinking.
Right, but wouldn't you want to use your subconscious a little more?
Do you get like what I'm trying to say with that?
Right, I get what you're trying to say, right? I understand what you're saying. You're thinking about, like, whereas literature, we can like pretty much just look at it, understand it, really.
Pretty much, but it still has that subjective.
It's very little.
I wouldn't say it's very little.
I say it's a medium. Okay.
Well, it also depends on literature because
on the book. Well, I'm taking like whatever classical books right now. That's what I'm thinking about in my head.
So like Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet.
Well, I mean that's
not just Romeo and Juliet, but like the current book that we're reading in literature, Chronicle of a Death Foretold.
Yeah.
Kitchen events that are based off of like the author's struggles or other people's struggles, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, right. Whereas I'm gonna see. Here's the thing I don't understand. Why did you say practical and not useful? Because wouldn't something that's more practical be more useful?
Well, it's more useful in like small instances, like I need to draw a thing for computer class, so then I'll just
drawing a thing. It's organizing. It's just general. Like you can use art and math. our IB Math HL course is almost requiring us to this at this point, right? The way we take our math round, we learn our basic skill set. Now it's the art of putting it together.
Okay, wait, hold
right?
on. Just saying the art of doesn't apply to art. I'm still confused about how the two are related.
What do you mean?
The IB Math and art.
So what I'm saying, right, is that in art, you're gonna use skills like I guess what I'm trying to say is that so art is teaching you practical skills, right? Did you get what I'm saying about earlier about art being more practical?
Yeah.
Yes or no? Or do you want me to elaborate on that?
I conceded that. I conceded.
Yeah, okay, right? That's what my point is. You can use the skills from art, right? So for example, art, I took art for the last 2 years, right? And I found that in art, I learned a lot more about like organization, definitely organization, right? From my freshman year, if you saw my first
You're talking about like just spatial reasoning.
Spatial reasoning, reason to even include stuff, reason to try stuff.
You could incorporate that in a math class, in a geometry sort of thing, because packing.
Not even just geometry, in algebra you could use it.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about like the art. We could replace the art with like a subject in math about like because that's where you're getting the usefulness from. I mean, that's just one instance.
Well, that's one incident, but it's more than that, right? Because math isn't gonna. Math will sure teach you about like triangles and shapes and stuff, but it's not gonna teach you how these all work together. Right? If you learned a skill of how to put stuff together, why it should go together, right? How to structure stuff in your mind.
The thing I'll say to that is literature is more like impactful in a almost like unquantifiable way because you can't just measure how like somebody is like you can't know how somebody's thinking, but you could know that it influenced it.
Right.
So yeah,
but it's the same thing in art.
So what I'm saying it's like sort of like almost like not comparable because like in literature it's almost impossible to like measure the effect.
I don't get what you mean with that.
I guess the effect, like the usefulness of literature would be like less of a noticeable. Oh, I can like draw this thing now for this one thing. Or
but that's not what art is. That's not what art is. That's what I'm saying. Art is not just drawing. Art is not just like.
All right. So what's the other
making?
Side?
Art is first of all working on your own creativity skills that you're gonna need later in life.
You'll develop
right?
those in literature also.
How?
Creativity. It's all about literature. If you're making an essay, what if you want to make your own literature?
You're not making your own literature, though. You're making an essay about somebody else's literature.
Being able to, like, if you can understand the way literature works, then you can make your own.
I mean, essentially.
Yeah, and also what are you talking about? We've maybe not like this year, but I've had to make like
obviously,
books and stuff before. Yeah,
essays and books. But that's what I'm saying. After a certain period, we don't need literature anymore.
Same thing for art. Oh,
No. Because art is a skill you can continue to develop, and no matter how good you think you are, you can always get better. Literature
that's true for literally everything.
No. Because literature has a cutoff, right? After our like whatever freshman year, right? We've got the basic skills. Obviously, you can if you really want.
You could keep learning about how the world works, how people see the world differently, all that kind of stuff. You will never be able to understand the psychology of a human mind.
Yeah, obviously.
So you could keep going on forever.
So
like I'm trying to like disprove the point where you said like literature has a cutoff point.
Right.
I'd argue
okay, that's fair. That was a bad point. But then what makes literature more useful than art? I still don't understand that.
So art is more practical, right?
Yes.
Literature is more useful for the subjective side. What I'm saying is the subjective side of art is too subjective to like be helpful. Because it's hard to connect that art to
like
the
I said
real
earlier,
life.
there's a lot of art that's based off real events that people are able to interpret almost quicker than literature. Literature, you'd have to almost read the entire book to figure out. Art, you look at a painting about the War of poems, right?
What about music piece? Oh, Beethoven's Concerto.
We're not talking about music right now.
Fine. I would call music art. I'd also call literature art. Never mind.
But like, you get what I'm saying?
Visual art, okay.
Art. Visual art, right? Let's just say, or even music, right? Okay, we can include music like that. So I know, especially in modern times, there's a lot more lyrics and stuff that makes music more accessible to understand and easier to comprehend. But like the thing with art, if it's not abstract, right? If it's like almost anything but abstract, we're not going to talk about abstract stuff because there's not really abstract literature, right?
I mean, sure there is.
I mean, there probably is, but it's not very common. But like you can look at a painting, interpret what the author meant right there, right then. So if I gave you a painting, a picture, or somebody like George Washington, right? The portrait of George Washington. You know what George Washington. You already know what it means. You know what the intention.
So why is it useful?
Your point about literature being like quicker, more straightforward in our head isn't necessarily false of art.
But at that point, the art is so easy to understand that it has no use. Like, oh, I have a picture of George Washington. How am I going to apply that in my life?
Even scenes. Well, okay. I feel like we should wrap this up because we're kind of running out of time.
Do you want to make a picture?
No, I don't want to make a
Fine,
part two.
okay.
We said we would do that about SATs.
Let's just both make a closing argument. Okay, so what I'll say is, I guess my final statement would be literature and visual art are almost uncomparable because they're useful in different ways.
I guess I can kind of conclusion throughout the thing. Different subjects, right? But each have their own skills. I'm still leaning towards art because I feel it's a little more practical for a wider range of career skills.
So I guess the final conclusion is we didn't decide.
Yeah, no decision. Thanks for listening, guys. Hop back in next week for the next episode.